everyone, this is Jackie Williams and welcome to another Global Video Hop. And this month I want to share with you 10 quick tips for using your detailed or your intricate dies. There are two issues that I sometimes have with my intricate dies. Now when they're brand new, generally they cut and release perfectly. But sometimes, particularly with wear, so your favorite ones, sometimes they are very hard to get out of the die. They get completely embedded in the die and it's very difficult to get them out. Sometimes when you try and get them out, they actually rip. And the other issue that sometimes happens is that particularly in the middle of the die, sometimes those little details don't actually cut all the way through. And then the little pieces that are supposed to fall out actually aren't completely cut. So I want to share with you a few tips for alleviating these problems. So the first thing I want to discuss is having a die that doesn't completely cut. The first suggestion would be to use a shim. Now a shim can be something you've purchased or it can be something as simple as a piece of cardstock. And I like to put this between my platform, the thick white plate, and plate number 2 or the thinner white plate, and then I die cut as normal. All that does is give it a little bit extra thickness so that when the die runs through there's that little bit more pressure on the cutting edges. The second suggestion for improving the cutting of your dies, particularly as they've been well used, is to cut them with the blade side up. So I've got my thick number 1 plate, my number 2 plate, my cutting plate, and then if this were the paper I was cutting, I would put the blade side up and then the paper on top, and then my second cutting plate, or whatever sandwich works in your machine. But by having the cutting plates face up, that puts them in more direct pressure with the roller blades, and you might find that they do cut just a little bit better. The third tip for improving the cutting of your dies is to change out your plates. As they are used, I'm sure you've noticed they get cuts in them. Sometimes they start to bend a little, but they also become a little bit more compressed. Every time you use them, of course, they're going through a lot of pressure. And sometimes just getting some new plates that are the full width that they're supposed to be will help. And eventually, and every once in a while, you also may need to get a new platform and a new number 2 plate, or new whatever the platforms are that you use in your machine. My next tip for getting the best out of your dies is to make sure that you move them around. So you might cut here and then the next time cut there and then cut here, and then you get the idea. You just move it around so that you're not always cutting right here. This is where your plate will likely get the most wear. And if you find that your plates are bowing quite frequently, one way to alleviate that is to continually move your dies around, and also to flip your plate over and then move it around and then flip your plate over, and just keep using it all areas of the plate like that. My next tip for getting your dies to cut as effectively as possible is, while all of these fit on your plate and on your paper, and maybe you need all of these, they actually work much better if you don't run them through all at once. It's just too many blades going through the machine at once. You will get a much better result if you do, one at a time, or even you could do like this. So as it runs through, there's only this many blades going through at once. I find if you run it through like this, for example, not that that exactly fits, it probably won't cut very well because you're getting all of these blades or cutting edges, they're not actually blades, running through the rollers at the exact same time. Now with these smaller individual dies, you have the option of running them through one at a time or the long way like this. However, sometimes we have large dies where there's no avoiding having all of those blades go through at the same time. So I have found that the best way is to run it through one time, going this way, and then pull it out and turn it 90 degrees, and then run it through a second time. Obviously, my paper is a little bit too long in this example, but you get the idea. I find that rolling it back and forth is effective. But it's even more effective and more efficient if you do turn it 90 degrees and then those cutting edges are going through in just that slightly different way. And on that same line of thinking, a die like this that is very long, if you run it through this way, it probably won't cut very well. It might, the first 10 times or so, but when you've used it quite a lot, it may not cut very well. The idea is because you've got all of these little cutting edges going through at the same time. Whereas if you run it through this way, you can see it breaks up the work for those rollers quite a bit, and you'll get a much better result if you run it through the long way. Now, all of these tips are also assuming that your machine is in good working order, that the bearings are the right tension, and that the rollers are working. So sometimes the machine itself just needs a tune-up or a little bit of tightening. So that is worth considering as well. Now let's talk about when your paper gets deeply embedded into your dies, and sometimes it's just really a tedious and long process to get the paper out, and or even despite your best efforts, they end up ripping. So a few things you can do. The first tip that I love and actually works really well is to use an emboss buddy or an anti-static bag, they're also called, and just tap that onto your dies, and that just puts a nice layer of corn flour or cornstarch onto your die, and it does help your paper then release. You can also do the same thing by rubbing a dryer sheet onto your dies, or you can even do both. I don't happen to have any dryer sheets. They're actually a little bit hard to come by in New Zealand, and the ones we do have are very heavily scented, and unfortunately I'm someone who's quite allergic to perfume, so I don't own any, but you could do the same thing, rub over with dryer sheets. The other thing that you can do is cut with baking paper or waxed paper, it's also called, or parchment paper, depending what country you live in. And I like to use 2 layers. And so what you would do is put your paper down, then your baking paper or wax paper or parchment paper, and then you will just cut like normal. And then you will end up with a piece of baking paper or a couple pieces of baking paper from your die, but that is what will get embedded into your die, your baking paper or parchment paper, and the actual cardstock that you're trying to cut will still be here on the platform, so you don't have to dig it out. And then I just leave that baking paper in the die and just keep cutting with it for as many times as I need. I can usually get about 10 cuts out of one run through with the baking paper, and then keep going. You could also use vellum. It's just a little bit more expensive, but that is an option too. So basically what it's doing is putting a layer of something waxy into the die so that the cardstock doesn't get embedded in there. And then my last tip for your dies is to actually just give them a rest. I have found that if one of my dies I've been working it really hard and it's just not working well, sometimes if I just leave it for a couple of days and come back, it's not so bad. And I'm not sure the logic behind that, but maybe just the metal needs to somehow relax or something. But you can always try that, just let them have a rest. Now, we can't have a video without having projects, so I wanted to show you just another fun way to use your dies that is really simple and really effective, and something everyone can do with any die that they have. So for my words and the dies, I'm going to use the Artfully Layered bundle. I absolutely love this bundle. I think it's just so fun. So I'm going to start with just stamping my words, and I love the font on this. And then I have 3 pieces of the Artfully Layered vellum, and I've got the one with the map on it. I know that's probably hard to see on this background. And I'm just going to tear those edges a little bit just to give it a little bit of a different effect, more of a washi tape look. And then I have found with vellum, our seal actually works quite well. You don't see it that much. I'm going to put these ones on horizontally. but I will show you some samples where I've got them on vertically. I'm just going to put that onto a basic black mat. Now I have that wonderful leaf die, and I've cut that in 3 colors. And I'm just going to adhere these 3 together, like right on top of each other. So just use some small dots of glue. Then once those 3 are here together, you have this really great effect. It's very subtle, and hopefully you can see that. I'm going to go ahead and put it on my card front, where you can just see a little peek of those colors from the side. Now you could very, very slightly offset those as well. I think I'll put it this way because that leaf is kind of leaning that way. There. So you can just see that little hint of color in through there. So you could do this like in rainbow colors or really bright colors, and I'll show you some more examples. Then we have these wonderful faux sea glass shapes, and we have Coastal Cabana and Granny Apple Green, and we also have these really great clear ones, which means that we can use our Stampin' Blends and color those up any color that we want. So I'm going to, I've got some here in Fresh Freesia, and just add those like that. And then that would go onto our card front like so. So here are a few other examples. So this one I've used the other leaf, the more round leaf, and I've used the green pebbles, and I've got some green colors there in behind. And this one I have Magenta Madness or Polished Pink. It's just this really hot pink. And you can see I've got the stripes going vertically on this one. And then on this one, I actually used the Artfully Composed Designer Series paper, and then used the mix of the colors. And then here I've stacked up actually 3 colors to match these 3 colors here underneath. So it's just a nice simple idea and another fun thing that you can do with your detailed dies. So I hope you've enjoyed, and if you have any tips that I haven't covered that work for you, please leave them below. It's really great if we can share and help one another. And of course, I always appreciate if you leave me a comment and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.